In the video on the personalization principle, we looked at how a friendly, polite, and more conversational tone leads to better learning. This builds on the social agency theory, which argues that a more conversational tone in multimedia messages creates a social bond between the instructor and learner, making it more likely that the learner will put in the effort to make sense of the content. If you listen to podcasts or follow any online content creators, especially educational channels, you probably tune in not just because you like learning new things, but because you also like their creators. The voice principle builds on the social agency theory and says that an engaging human voice is better than a disinterested or artificially synthesized voice. In other words, hearing lightning forms when there's a buildup of electric charge in the atmosphere is better than
Lightning forms when there is a buildup of electric charge in the atmosphere.
in an early study, one group of students was presented with materials narrated in a standard accent, while another group heard from a narrator with a foreign accent and disinterested voice. The group who got the standard accent did better in transfer tests, with an effect size of 0.9. I'll have more to say on this study later. In another study, one group of students received materials from a human voice and another from a synthesized voice. The group who got the human narrator did better in transfer tests, with an effect size of 0.79. This trend persists when there's an on-screen agent with a preference for human voice there as well. More recent studies using modern voice synthesizers that sound more human show less difference in transfer tests between a human voice and an artificially generated voice. However, the voice principle is not just about artificially generated voices. In the first study I mentioned, researchers compared a standard accent with a narrator that had a foreign accent, and showed that learners who got the standard accent did better in transfer tests. Other researchers have also confirmed the influence of accents on credibility. In fact, accents have been used to influence people in deliberate ways. During World War II, Germans hired Nazi propagandist William Joyce to spread anti-British propaganda in an effort to shape the British public's view of the war. Like the BBC radio broadcasters at the time, Joyce spoke in what's called the received pronunciation, which is considered the formal, standard British accent. In 1941, BBC hired Wilfred Pickles, who spoke with a regional Yorkshire accent. Some believe it was to counter Nazi propaganda, as a regional accent is harder to impersonate. Some believe it was an effort to unify Britain by highlighting its diversity. Although some listeners welcomed the new accent, others were less likely to believe what they heard from Pickles because of his accent. Today, neuroscientists using fMRI show that listening to someone with an accent activates a part of our brain that makes judgments about believability and trust. However, that's not to say that we can never trust someone with an accent, although we do judge them differently. Additional research has shown that exposure to accents over time can reduce discrimination against them. It's unfortunate that people get distracted by accents. They shouldn't be. But I've had people bring attention to a narrator's accent, even when the narrator is British, just because they're not used to hearing it. So, where does that leave us with the voice principle? Of all the principles discussed so far, the voice principle seems to have more to do with potential bias than limits in our cognitive capacity. That means we can lower our biases over time, and with more human-sounding voice synthesizers and more exposure to interacting with artificial assistants, maybe the voice principle will be less relevant over time. That said, keep in mind the underlying idea, which is that learners value the social bond with the instructor, and anything you can do to create and strengthen that bond is worth trying.